Right, Matt. Previously you spoke about how product design and manufacturing processes and product service mixes as product service systems can help us deal with the resource waste and pollution issues that we face for more sustainable living. And you also mentioned, that the behaviour of the different people involved, whether they're designing, in the early stages, or whether they're users, and figuring out whether they want a product or a product service and how they want to use it, and of course all the manufacturing in between, and then the end of the product's life and what that means. So at all those stages and all those roles, change is involved, and behaviour is very important, and how people see things and think about things and evaluate things, all are very important, in their beliefs. So I think you said you'd like to talk about one or two aspects. This is a very complex process, but one or two aspects of the transition involved in all this, or the kind of transitions that are involved in all this. So over to you.
Okay, thanks for that, John. What I particularly like to draw out actually is the role of design in transitions, and I think that, in my view anyway, design is a distributed competence. I think that it isn't actually exclusive to professional designers. It's actually something that we all do. If you think about it, many households, we may replant our garden and chop trees down and change our garden. Well, that's really, in some respects, an act of design. We're redesigning our garden, we're remaking it. We may also change our living room around to change the position of the sofa and the television or whatever, and that's an act of design. Also though, we may redesign our practices, what actually we do in the everyday, and don't always actually necessarily think about those things which I talked about earlier, which actually are routine, and that you talked about in terms of turning your boiler off earlier in the morning and in the evening, and that making an environmental difference. So for me, design is something which is distributed. But also though, it's difficult to deny, and obviously there are professional designers out there, professional product designers and architects and a whole host of design professions which play a key role in the development of material artifacts, whether they be buildings or computers or a whole host of household goods. And really that activity plays out at the beginning of the process of developing some sort of artifact. And increasingly, as I identified earlier, there's a number of services which have been developed to replace, as well as sit alongside, or in other words complement products, a number of services which have been developed. So service design is also important as well, and that's a professional design activity. Now for me, I have questions about how designers can begin to engage in environmental challenges. And this is something which has gone on for a long time, and there are many authors which have been working and doing good work in this field. For me, one of the things that I'm interested in is how designers begin to engage actually in what's going on, and how they can understand trends and build upon those trends as they emerge. For me, it's not a case of generating scientific knowledge which can be easily separated from context to inform design about, for example, user behaviour, but rather what we need to do is we need to actually actively engage in contexts to find out what's going on, because I don't believe that you can separate knowledge easily from context, certainly not to the levels of detail that we may need to understand behaviour and to redesign our products. So understanding context, engaging with context is really important, and for designers to get to know these contexts, perhaps through ethnographic methods, where they spend time in communities, is a really important activity. There I think we have a call for pragmatism more generally as well, and I think it's not just understanding context, it's understanding what's going on. And if you like, one term which we may use is in sharing the sweat. Sharing the sweat and the activities which are going on in a given area. If we think about a city like Brighton, there is a lot of there are many environmental projects which are going on here. Well, for me then the question becomes, well, how can designers begin to engage in those projects to make a difference? Rather than arriving in Brighton with a number of preconceived ideas, for example, which have been developed from knowledge which we just take from, which supposedly can be separated from context. So I think a call to understand context, a call to build on what's going on and pragmatically engage is really important. The second thing that I think is really important with respect to how designers can engage is around participation and co-design, and how we can get a number of participants to engage in design is very important. Well, I think getting many voices heard in the design process is really important. And secondly, I think that it's not only a case of hearing many voices in that process, whether they be users or a variety of local stakeholders, such as local government employers, for example. It's also a case of how do they make a difference in the design process. I think that we not only have to have design processes where we can hear many voices, but actually design processes which can actually change in response to those voices.
So you're actually empowering or giving people, you're sharing power with people.
That's right. So sharing power with people, I think, is really important, because as I said earlier, design is a distributed competence, I believe. But nonetheless, there is a professional design process which plays out at the beginning of a product's development cycle. And to some extent, this affords or restricts in some way what can subsequently be done with that product and potentially to that product. And I think by engaging with local context and engaging with a variety of stakeholders in the design process, I think designers will be better able to understand what may subsequently happen to the product which they produce, and actually what changes may be made to it by stakeholders. And I think if we engage those stakeholders, those actors in that process, there are more opportunities for them to think about redesign processes, redesigning their practices, redesigning processes in due course. So for me, the future of sustainable design or environmental design is very much about pragmatism, taking a pragmatic approach, building on what's going on in an area, knowing what's going on in an area, and beginning to engage and enabling a whole host of actors to participate in the process. And importantly, as far as participation is concerned, to make a difference, to have the power to make a difference in that design process.
Great, Matt, that's very helpful. Thank you, and interesting.